But by the time I got home, it was after the 1st of August, and the place that we lived, there was an L-shaped road, dirt road, that came up to it. And you could stand at our living room window and look out and see where that dirt road connected to US 30 North, the main highway that went up through there. So my stepfather, Roy Kuntz, was standing looking out that window, and he sees this car turn and start up, and he recognized the car. It was the bishop's car. And he was just beside himself because he thought, he was an inactive member of the church, he thought the bishop was going to give him an assignment. So the bishop came walking in the door, shook hands with him, and he could see that Roy was kind of upset. So he said, and this is my mission call. You can relax, Roy. This isn't about you. We want to call the boy on a mission. And that was the way I was called.
Oh, wow.
That was my interview. And so he said, how much money have you got? And I said, well, I have a little over $1,000 from mustering out pay and so forth. And he said, well, you'll need about $1,200. Of course, he forgot about all the incidental expenses at the front end. And then he turned to Roy and he said, if the boy's a little short, you can help him some, can't you?
No pressure.
And so I went into the Texas-Louisiana mission.
Wow.
Now at that time, both states were in a single mission.
That is crazy. That's huge.
And I was assigned to the San Antonio district
See, that's so
of the
cool.
Texas-Louisiana mission. There are now, what is it, 7 missions in Texas?
I think there might be 8 or 9 now.
8 or 9 now. They multiply. Anyway, that's the mission that I went into. And the mission president was a half-brother to George Albert Smith.
Oh, wow.
Now, George Albert was a little man, you remember him.
Yeah.
But my mission president, Glenn G. Smith, was 6'6"
Whoa.
and weighed about 320 pounds.
Oh,
He was a
big guy.
big man. I mean, he wasn't fat, he was just big.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Always been.
And so he was our mission president, and he was out touring the mission. So what they did is they called the local people and asked them if they could take a couple of missionaries for a week until the president got back. Well, the week went by and another week started, and we got word that all the missionaries had been sent out. And so my companion was Elder Grant from Arizona. And I could tell you lots of stories about him. Anyway, he called up and they said, yes, all the missionaries are gone, there are none of them left. And he said, well, I don't like to disagree with you, but there are at least 2 of them left. And so this was the counselor of the mission president that he was talking to. He said, well, who are they? And he said, Feineaur and Brown. And he said, huh? And he checked his records and he said, well, that's right. We have a Feineaur and we have a Brown, but they've been sent out. And he said, no, they haven't. We're still here. So we went in and they sent us to San Antonio. And the head of the San Antonio district was a chiropractor. And he was also the church leader. And we got there and he says, I don't know what to do with you. He said, I've assigned every senior companion I have to the missionaries that came out ahead of you, and I have nobody to send you with. And he said, in fact, I have no place to put you. So he put us on a bus and sent us to Harlingen, Texas.
No way.
You know what that is?
Now, do you know where it is?
I do know where that is. I haven't been
Brownsville is as far south as you can go and stay in the U.S. Harlingen is 50 miles north of Brownsville. And in between was a little town called San Benito. Well, our mission leader lived in San Benito, and I'll get to him in a minute. But he sends the two of us down there as companions. There's no senior companion, we're just companions.
You're just on your own.
And we started out, and the first thing we did is try to find the church leader. And we went to San Benito because we knew he was out of San Benito. And we were talking to the gal at the desk, and she said, no, I don't know anybody by that name. And I've forgotten his name now. I don't know anybody by that name. And a farmer, I mean, he spoke broken English. And he came up to us and said the name, and then he went like this, you know. So we went and got in his truck, and he hauled us out into the country.
Oh, you're brave.
And pointed to a building. Well, the building was a chicken coop. Now, what had happened was that there had been a fire break out in this man's home, and it had destroyed his home. So what he had done is to take over the chicken coop. He thoroughly cleansed it, you know,
Yeah.
and set up what furniture he could get in there. And so we go up and knock on the door, and his wife comes to the door. And we were introduced to our local priesthood supervisor. And he was the branch president of the branch that they had there. And so that's how we got started in San Benito. Now, I was there in the Rio Grande Valley for 1 solid year.
Oh, wow.
Grant Brown was transferred at the end of 8 or 9 months. And I stayed there and received a new companion. And then I was finally transferred and went on up the valley to San Antonio, where we were assigned. And one of the missionaries there in San Antonio had a motorbike. And by a motorbike, I mean a bicycle with a little motor mounted on the back of it.
Yeah.
The thing it was terrible on gas. It only got 100 miles per gallon. And so he had one, and somebody gave me a bicycle, and I managed to get a motor and get it mounted on there, and we went everywhere with those motorbikes. And so I was there in San Antonio for 6 or 8 months, and we went south to Kennedy and Querl.
I haven't heard of those.
Well, they're 100 miles south of San Antonio, about 100 miles, and they're just north of, there's a coastal resort there. I can't remember the name now.
Corpus Christi?
Corpus Christi.
Oh, okay.
They're just north of Corpus Christi.
Oh, nice.
And we went down there because that's where Grant was. That's where Grant wound up, so we went down there to see him and have Christmas with him. And somebody had allowed them to stay in this house. It was a vacant house. Nobody had lived in it for a long time, but they moved in, And in the middle of the night, we heard this racket. And Grant said, "Don't worry, it's just the rats
Oh, are you
carrying
serious?
things around."
Oh.
And they were huge, you know,
Oh, sick.
Yeah.
big rats and so forth.
Wow.
And so we visited there, and then I was assigned up to a little town called Center Point. There was a town called Comfort, and then there was a wide spot in the road called Center Point, and there was a family that had been converted by the missionaries. The mother and father had not joined the church, but 4 daughters did. And so the meetings were held at Center Point. And they were held in a bar.
Are you serious?
We went in, the first option was to go in and clean out the cigarette butts and anything else that was left, make the place presentable, and then set it up for our meetings. And we met there in that bar. Later I was able to move up into what they call Kerrville.
I don't know where Kerrville is.
All right. Well, I was in Kerrville for about 3 or 4 months. And then I went on up the valley, and I'm going to forget the name of the town up on up the valley. Anyway, the man in charge up there, the man who was a member up there, was a member of the same family that we had met down in Kennedy when we went down there. And they had treated him abusively. His family had basically kicked him out. They treated him so abusively that he left. But he became very active in the church. And he had a truck, and he would go out and he would load that truck down with workers, people who worked in the fields, and bring them in to hear the missionaries talk.
Oh, wow.
And then the missionaries would give their talks in the meetings. Well, he was up there at that time. He was up Mason. I think the town was called Mason. And he was a nice man. He was a big man too. And he got the idea. There was a missionary there from Canada, and she was a regular Westerner. I mean, she would butcher a steer for you. She was really a Westerner. And he thought the sun rose and set with her. And he got the idea because those 2 sisters said, "Look, we've been carrying this all this time. We want you to teach the lessons in the meetings." And so we did, and then he got the idea that we were, treating them improperly, that we had taken over and were pushing them out. And so he called the mission leader and said that Feineaur had to go.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
So when we found out what he had done, we called the mission leader and told him that we thought he really should come up and hear the whole story. So he did. He came up and he listened to the whole story, and being wise, he moved me to a new location. I went to Del Rio.
Oh, that's in our mission too. I've totally been there.
And have you been in Quemado?
Is that by Del Rio?
It's a little town near Eagle Pass.
I've been through it. I have.
Yeah.
I haven't worked in there, but I've been to Eagle Pass.
Quemado.
Oh yeah.
Quemado.
This is so cool.
All right, and I was there with Elder Robertson, and then Elder Robertson decided that he needed a bike, and he bought an Indian motorcycle.
Whoa.
What is that like?
Scared me to death.